Wilderness is often visualized as a beautiful, rugged expanse, untouched by human beings. Indeed, the Wilderness Act of 1964 brands wilderness as land untrammeled by man. But if you dig into the idea of wild nature, you tend to learn much more about our relationship with wilderness than the physical space itself. And this concept of untrammeled land pervades a number of movies in the form of picturesque, quote-unquote, frontiers. If we look beyond the beautiful vistas captured in sweeping helicopter shots, however, we can begin to understand how the concept of wilderness is used and constructed by American culture. Into the Wild provides a perfect avenue through which to explore this idea of wild nature. Specifically, Sean Penn's creative take on Chris McCandless offers insight into how we construct nature, especially wilderness, as a place for self-discovery, transcendence, and an escape from society. However, as we discover by the end of the movie, the romantic wild that Chris McCandless so eagerly searches for throughout the film no longer exists. Instead, McCandless willed his wilderness to be wilder than it really was. So let's deconstruct two scenes from Into the Wild in order to approach how wilderness has been constructed in the American mind. The first, and maybe the most apparent, is the following conversation between Chris and Wayne roughly a quarter of the way through the movie.
I'm gonna be all the way out there, all the way fucking out there, just on my own. You know, no fucking watch, no map, no axe, no nothing. Just be out there in it. You know, big mountains, rivers, sky, game, just be out there in it, you know, in the wild.
Society and the wild. This is the dualism that McCandless conjures up, and one that plagues many a romantic adventurer who believes that wilderness is the absence of society. McCandless evokes this idea throughout his conversation with Wayne, hinting that wilderness is a place where he could finally escape his traumatic childhood and embrace a much simpler life. Despite his own beliefs, however, McCandless's epic Alaskan wilderness was intimately intertwined with his social experiences. He relied on a broken-down bus and a system of rules and organization that brought a form of civilization to his immediate surroundings. Many of the magic bus scenes contained short cutaways to airplanes flying high in the sky, signaling, if just for a second, that McCandless still hasn't left society's clutches, and that maybe wilderness is not as separate from society as Chris McCandless believes. Alongside a space void of society, McCandless also searches for a transcendent experience in his travels, an experience that is hinted at many times in the form of various vague religious references. In many ways, McCandless's search for wilderness is a search for some form of spiritual deliverance, which he often struggles to find in relationships with other people. We can see this at play in the imagery and music of a shot like this. Or in one of the last scenes of the film.
What I see now.
Heavily influenced by authors like Jack London and especially Thoreau, McCandless dives headfirst into the idea of a spiritually infused wilderness. For him, being lost in the wild meant experiencing a primal state through which he might find a mental and spiritual awakening. And we see this worldview in one of his conversations with Ron.
I'll miss you too, Ron. But you're wrong if you think that the joy of life comes principally from human relationships. God's placed it all around us. It's in everything, in anything we can experience.
While Ron believes that love and interpersonal relationships can lead to a sense of awe, McCandless steadfastly maintains that experiencing some form of wild nature will bring a similar result. This transcendental construction of wilderness pulls heavily from the famous works of Emerson and Thoreau, who wrote often of nature as a place to experience a form of heaven. As we come to learn by the end of the movie, these two ideals of wilderness are often hard to find in the physical realities of the Yukon. McCandless discovers that for him, true happiness is found with others, and not, as he had hoped throughout the movie, in the form of untouched wild nature. Indeed, had McCandless owned a map, he would have discovered a nature very much affected by the hands of the society that he sought to escape. His bus sat right near some hunting cabins, and had he walked just a little ways down the riverbank, McCandless would have found a cable and basket system for fording the river. So why does it matter that we understand how this fictional McCandless sought to construct nature? Because he functions as a pretty effective stand-in for how many modern-day American nature lovers tend to approach wilderness. We construct wild nature as wholly separate from the perceived pains of society, claiming it as a mental clearing ground and a place for spiritual awakening. Yes, these physical spaces are important for retaining things like biodiversity, but our society now shapes wild spaces according to what we desire them to be. Understanding this, then, will help us better navigate our complicated relationship with wilderness. This video was made possible in part by the wonderful people who support me on Patreon. If you're interested in helping me grow this channel, head on over to Patreon and pledge a small amount of money for every video I release. In return, I'll send you gifts like a handwritten thank you note or an Our Changing Climate sticker. As always, if you like what you just saw, share it around and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next Friday.